Ryan Carter stood in the sterile hallway of St. Mary's Hospital, the scent of antiseptic clinging to his clothes. The beeping of machines echoed through the dimly lit corridor, each sound a painful reminder of what he had lost, or what he was on the verge of losing. He adjusted his silk tie, though he hardly knew why. There was no meeting to attend, no business deal to close. For the first time in his life, he was facing a problem that no amount of money, power, or negotiation could fix. A doctor approached, her white coat slightly wrinkled, deep circles under her eyes from too many sleepless shifts. "Mr. Carter," she said gently, flipping through Sophia's chart. "I know this is difficult, but we need to talk about your wife's condition." Ryan swallowed hard and nodded, bracing himself. He had heard the same clinical words countless times over the past 3 months, yet each conversation cut deeper. "There haven't been any significant changes," the doctor continued. "Sophia's vital signs are stable, but her brain activity remains minimal. I know you suggested bringing in a specialist from Switzerland, but," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Even the most advanced treatments haven't shown promising results in cases like hers." Ryan felt his chest tighten. "How much?" he asked abruptly. The doctor blinked. "I'm sorry. How much would it cost to bring him here?" "I'll pay double. Triple." She sighed. "Mr. Carter, this isn't about money." For the first time in his life, Ryan felt powerless. He had spent years building an empire, turning Carter Financial into one of the most successful investment firms in the country. He had made billions, yet none of it could buy back what truly mattered. He stepped into Sophia's room, his polished shoes making almost no sound on the linoleum floor. The soft hum of the ventilator filled the space. Sophia lay motionless on the hospital bed, her once vibrant face pale, her dark hair spread across the pillow. Machines surrounded her, their blinking lights the only indication that life still lingered within her body. Ryan sank into the chair beside her bed, reaching for her hand. It was cold. He gently rubbed her fingers between his own, trying to transfer some warmth, some life. "I talked to the doctors again," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They say there's nothing else to be done. But I don't accept that, Sophia. I can't." He exhaled shakily. "I'm tired, sophomore. So damn tired." A nurse knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Carter, I need to check her vitals." Ryan nodded and stood, grabbing his coat. "Are you leaving already?" the nurse asked. "Yes," he lied. "I have an important meeting." But there was no meeting. For the first time since the accident, Ryan walked out of the hospital without knowing when, if, he would come back. Ryan Carter stepped out of St. Mary's Hospital into the cold night air, the drizzle soaking through his expensive wool coat. The city lights reflected in the rain puddles on the pavement, shimmering like broken glass. He loosened his tie, feeling suffocated, not just by the fabric but by the weight of everything that had happened. 3 months. 3 months of hospital visits, consultations with top specialists, and sleepless nights filled with desperate prayers. And still, Sophia remained in a coma, locked away in a world he couldn't reach. He took a deep breath, trying to shake the hopelessness that clung to him like the damp chill in the air. That was when he heard the voice, small, hesitant, but clear. "Sir?" Ryan barely registered it at first. The city was always full of voices, street vendors, cab drivers, the distant wail of sirens. But this one was different. He turned his head and saw a little girl standing a few feet away. She couldn't have been older than 6 or 7. Her thin frame was swallowed by an oversized hoodie, the sleeves hanging past her fingertips. Her bare feet, caked in mud, peeked out from beneath a tattered skirt. Ryan's first instinct was to ignore her. He had spent his life in a world where people like her were invisible, just part of the city's background noise. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. "How much do you need?" he asked, already thumbing through the bills. The girl shook her head, her tangled brown hair falling into her face. "I don't need money." Ryan hesitated. He had expected her to take the cash and disappear, like so many others. Instead, she took a small step forward and said something that made his blood run cold. "I know how to save your wife." The wallet hung suspended in his hand. His pulse quickened. "What did you just say?" His voice came out sharper than intended. The girl didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him with an unsettling calmness. "Your wife. The one who's sleeping in there." She pointed toward the hospital doors. "I know how to wake her up." Ryan's grip tightened around the leather of his wallet. His first thought was that this was some kind of scam. Had someone seen him leaving the hospital night after night, broken and desperate? Was this girl being used to manipulate him? "How do you know about my wife?" he demanded. The girl smiled, a strange, knowing smile that was far too old for her young face. "She has a pretty smile," she said softly. "It starts on the right side first, like she's about to tell a secret." Ryan's breath caught in his throat. That was exactly how Sophia smiled. It was something only he would have noticed, something private, intimate. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl extended her small, dirty hand toward him. "My name is Emma," she said simply. "And if you trust me, I can help you." Ryan looked at her outstretched hand. Any other day, he would have walked away. But today was not any other day. Today, he had nothing left to lose. "My name is Ryan," he said, shaking her tiny hand. And just like that, his world began to shift. Ryan followed Emma through the dimly lit streets, the rain falling steadily now, soaking into the cracked pavement. They had left the polished sidewalks near the hospital behind, trading them for a part of the city he had never set foot in. Here, the streetlights flickered, and the smell of damp concrete mixed with something stale, old food, uncollected trash. He tightened his coat, glancing down at Emma, who walked barefoot through the puddles without a second thought. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "You'll see," Emma replied, leading him around a corner where an old, abandoned building loomed ahead. The sign above the rusted iron gate was barely legible, its paint faded and chipped. But Ryan could still make out the words, "St. Hope Orphanage." He frowned. "What does this place have to do with my wife?" Emma didn't answer. Instead, she pushed the gate open and stepped inside. Ryan hesitated only a moment before following. The interior of the building was cold and smelled of dust and mildew. Despite the decay, there were remnants of life, drawings taped to the walls, broken toys scattered in corners, a few threadbare blankets stacked on an old wooden bench. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "She used to come here every week, you know." Ryan turned sharply. A woman stood in the doorway, leaning on a cane. Her gray hair was pulled into a loose bun, and though her face was lined with age, her sharp eyes held something familiar, something wise and knowing, like Emma's. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm Margaret," she said, stepping closer. "I ran this place for 30 years. At least, until we lost funding and had to shut down." Ryan looked around, trying to imagine what it must have been like when the halls were filled with children instead of echoes. "My wife," he said slowly. "You said she used to come here?" Margaret nodded. Sophia started volunteering here almost a year before her accident. Twice a week, without fail. Reading to the kids, bringing snacks, helping with schoolwork. She was their favorite. Ryan's stomach tightened. Sophia had never mentioned an orphanage, never spoken about volunteering. It didn't make sense. She never told me, he murmured, almost to himself. Margaret studied him carefully. She tried, she said gently. More than once. But you were always busy. The words stung, even though they weren't meant to hurt. Busy. That had always been his excuse, hadn't it? Too many meetings, too many deals, too many phone calls. He had spent years ensuring their financial future, convinced that giving Sophia a life of luxury was enough. And all the while, she had been here, in a crumbling orphanage, finding purpose in something he had never even noticed. She wanted you to come with her, Margaret continued. Said she wanted to show you this place, to show you what truly mattered to her. Ryan swallowed hard, guilt settling in his chest like a heavy weight. He thought of Sophia lying in that hospital bed, silent and still. He had spent months waiting for her to wake up, desperate to bring her back. And yet, even before the accident, maybe he had already lost her, piece by piece, moment by moment. Emma tugged at his sleeve, pulling him toward a wall covered in old drawings. Look, she said, pointing to one in particular. Ryan stepped closer. It was a simple crayon drawing, 3 stick figures standing in a bright green field under a yellow sun. A man, a woman, and a child. In the bottom corner, there was a signature in Sophia's neat handwriting. With love, Sophia. Ryan reached out, running his fingers over the paper. His vision blurred. She wanted a family, he whispered. Margaret nodded. Yes. And I think she was hoping you'd want one, too. For the first time in months, Ryan felt something shift deep inside him. A realization. A regret. And maybe, just maybe, a second chance. Ryan Carter had spent his life mastering the art of control. In boardrooms, he dictated the terms. In negotiations, his word was law. But here, in the quiet of an abandoned orphanage, surrounded by memories of a wife he had never truly understood, he felt powerless. The realization gnawed at him. Sophia had been reaching for something beyond the life he built for her. While he had been closing billion-dollar deals, she had been holding the hands of children who had nothing. She had been offering them warmth, kindness, and hope, things he had long forgotten how to give. That night, back in his penthouse, Ryan found himself staring out at the city skyline, but for the first time, the view felt empty. The towering glass buildings, the endless rows of lights, he used to see them as symbols of his success. Now, they felt like walls, separating him from what truly mattered. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. Are you sad? He turned to see Emma standing barefoot in the doorway of the guest room he had set up for her. She clutched the oversized hoodie he had bought for her earlier that day, her small fingers gripping the fabric like a lifeline. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, he admitted. I think I just realized I've been looking at the wrong things for a long time. Emma tilted her head. Like what? Like thinking money could fix everything. He exhaled deeply. Like believing success was measured in numbers instead of people. The little girl considered this for a moment, then climbed onto the couch beside him. Sophia didn't think like that, she said simply. Ryan smiled, a small, sad smile. No. She didn't. The next morning, something was different. Instead of heading straight to his office, Ryan made a detour. He drove back to St. Hope Orphanage, standing in the empty lot beside it. The building was falling apart, but he didn't just see the peeling paint or the broken windows anymore. He saw potential. He saw what Sophia must have seen. By the end of the week, he had met with his legal team. A plan was in motion. The Carter Foundation, named in Sophia's honor, would fund the creation of a new community center where the orphanage once stood. It would provide shelter, education, and medical support to children in need, the legacy Sophia had started, but never had the chance to finish. But the biggest change wasn't in his business plans. It was in his heart. Each evening, Ryan found himself looking forward to coming home, not to an empty penthouse, but to Emma's stories about her day. He took her shopping, made sure she ate proper meals, even learned how to braid her hair, badly, but he was improving. Slowly, the once lonely businessman was becoming something else, something he never imagined himself to be. He was becoming a father. And though Sophia still lay in a hospital bed, unmoving, Ryan finally understood that saving her wasn't just about medical miracles. It was about becoming the man she had believed he could be. And for the first time in his life, he wanted to be that man. The hospital room had become a second home to Ryan. For months, he had sat in the same chair beside Sophia's bed, holding her hand, speaking to her, hoping for something, anything. The doctors had warned him not to expect miracles. Coma patients, they said, sometimes never wake up. And if they do, they're rarely the same. But Ryan refused to believe that. Every day, he and Emma visited. They filled the room with stories, music, and laughter. Emma would sit by Sophia's bedside, telling her about school, the books she was reading, even the silly things Ryan did when he tried to cook. "He burned toast again today," she'd giggle. "It's not that hard, Mrs. Sophia. You'll have to teach him when you wake up." Ryan would talk about the community center, how the construction was progressing, how he was doing what she had wanted all along. He told her about the children, about Margaret, about Emma, how this little girl had changed his life in a way he never saw coming. And then, one evening, everything changed. It had been a long day. Ryan was exhausted, but still, he sat beside Sophia, his fingers absent-mindedly stroking her hand. Emma was curled up in the chair across the room, half asleep. The monitors beeped steadily, their rhythm unchanged. "You know," Ryan said softly, "I never told you this, but the day I asked you to marry me, I was terrified." He let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head at the memory. "You were standing in the rain, laughing like a kid, and I thought, this woman, this incredible woman, is way too good for me." He squeezed her hand gently. "I still think that, sophomore." And then, it happened. A twitch. The faintest movement. Ryan froze. He thought he imagined it, that his exhausted mind was playing tricks on him. But then he felt it again, her fingers, curling ever so slightly against his. His breath caught in his throat. "Sophia?" His voice was barely more than a whisper. "If you can hear me, do that again." For a long moment, there was nothing. And then, her fingers moved. Ryan shot up from his chair. "Emma!" His voice cracked with emotion. "Go get a nurse. Now!" Emma, wide-eyed, scrambled out of her chair and ran from the room. Ryan leaned over Sophia, his heart pounding. Her eyelashes fluttered, just slightly. Her breathing changed, still steady, but deeper, more purposeful. "Sophia," he choked out, his vision blurred with tears. "I'm here. I've been here. We've been waiting for you." The door burst open, and nurses rushed in, followed by a doctor. Ryan stepped back as they surrounded the bed, checking monitors, shining a light in her eyes, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. "She's responding," one of them said, clearly astonished. "She's trying to wake up." Ryan felt Emma tug on his sleeve. "She's coming back," she whispered, eyes filled with a hope so pure it nearly shattered him. He wrapped an arm around the little girl, holding her close. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Sophia was coming back. The waiting room at the Child Services office was cold and unwelcoming. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, casting a harsh glow over the scuffed linoleum floors. Posters about child welfare and legal procedures lined the walls, their messages well-intended but impersonal. Ryan Carter sat in one of the stiff plastic chairs, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Next to him, Sophia sat upright, her posture calm but her fingers gently gripping his, a silent sign of her own nerves. Emma swung her legs beside them, her feet barely brushing the floor. She hadn't said much since they arrived, but Ryan could feel her anxiety. She had been through this before. She had sat in rooms just like this, waiting for adults to decide what to do with her life. This time, Ryan was determined to make sure she wouldn't be left behind. A middle-aged woman in a navy blue blazer stepped into the room, holding a thick folder. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter? You can come in now." Ryan felt a squeeze on his hand from Sophia before they stood and followed the woman into a small office. Emma hesitated, her little hand tightening around Sophia's. Ryan saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart," Sophia murmured, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. "We're right here." Inside, the social worker, Ms. Winters, according to her nameplate, sat behind a desk piled high with paperwork. She adjusted her glasses and gave them a measured look. "I've reviewed your case," she said, flipping open the file. "It's complex." Ryan clenched his jaw. He had spent his career handling billion-dollar negotiations, but this meeting, the one where his family's future was at stake, felt like the most important one of his life. Ms. Winters sighed. "Emma's legal situation is complicated. She was never officially relinquished by her parents, so we have to follow a specific process." Ryan exhaled sharply. "We're prepared for that." She nodded. "That's good to hear. But there's also the question of suitability. Mr. Carter, your financial stability is undeniable. However, the courts will want assurance that you and Mrs. Carter can provide a consistent, emotionally supportive environment, especially given Mrs. Carter's recent medical recovery." Sophia sat forward. "I understand your concerns," she said, her voice steady. "But I want you to know, I'm fully committed to this. I'm recovering, yes, but I'm strong. And Emma isn't just a child we want to help. She's our daughter." Ryan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, well-worn photograph. He placed it on the desk and slid it toward Ms. Winters. It was a picture of Sophia and Emma at the orphanage, taken months before the accident. A moment frozen in time, long before Ryan even knew the truth. "My wife already saw Emma as family," Ryan said quietly. "She just never got the chance to tell me before the accident. But now, I see it too. And I won't let her go." The room fell silent. Emma shifted in her seat, looking at Ms. Winters with wide, nervous eyes. Finally, the woman sighed, tapping her pen against the folder. "It won't be easy," she admitted. "There are procedures. Background checks. A home study." She looked up at them. "But I can see this is more than just a decision for you. It's a commitment." Ryan didn't hesitate. "Whatever it takes." Ms. Winters offered a small, rare smile. "Then let's get started." Beside him, Emma let out a breath she had been holding, and for the first time that day, she smiled. The thick envelope sat unopened on Ryan Carter's desk. He had read the offer once, twice, enough times to know it by heart. The world's largest financial firm wanted him as their next global CEO. The salary was staggering. The power, undeniable. The prestige, unmatched. And yet, it would require him to move to London for 3 years. 3 years away from Sophia, who was still rebuilding her strength after the coma. 3 years away from Emma, who was just beginning to trust that she finally had a real family. 3 years away from the community center, the project that had become more than just a tribute to Sophia, it had become his purpose. A year ago, the decision would have been simple. Career always came first. Success, expansion, legacy, that's what drove him. He had sacrificed holidays, missed anniversaries, and rescheduled personal moments without a second thought. But that was before the accident. Before Sophia's secret life at the orphanage. Before Emma. Now, success felt different. The phone rang, breaking his thoughts. He didn't need to look at the caller ID to know who it was. "Ryan, my friend." Victor Reynolds' booming voice came through the speaker. "I assume you've reviewed the contract?" "I have." "And?" There was expectation in Victor's tone, as if Ryan's answer was already decided. Ryan exhaled, standing from his chair and looking out the window. The city skyline stretched before him, just as it always had, but it no longer felt like an achievement. It felt like a reminder. A past version of himself he was ready to leave behind. "I appreciate the offer, Victor. Truly. But I'm going to have to decline." Silence. Then a chuckle. "I'm sorry, did you just say decline?" "I did." Another pause. "Ryan, do you realize what you're turning down? This is the opportunity of a lifetime." Ryan smiled to himself. That was the thing, he had already found his opportunity of a lifetime. It wasn't in boardrooms or skyscrapers. It was in the little girl who had learned to trust him. It was in the woman who had fought her way back to him. It was in the promise he made to be the man Sophia had always believed he could be. "I used to think that," Ryan admitted. "But my priorities have changed. I have a family now, and I can't walk away from them." Victor sighed, clearly disappointed. "You know, men like us don't usually turn down power like this." "Maybe I'm not the man I used to be," Ryan said simply. Victor huffed a laugh. "Well, I hope she's worth it." Ryan's gaze drifted to a photo on his desk, Sophia and Emma at the community center, smiling in the sun. "She is," he said. "They both are." As he hung up, Ryan felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. He had spent his life chasing success, but now he understood, true success wasn't in wealth. It was in love. The sun shone brightly over the newly completed Sophia Carter Community Center, casting a golden glow over the gathering crowd. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and the laughter of children filled the air. It was the kind of day that felt like a celebration of second chances, of lives redirected, of love rediscovered. Ryan stood on the stage, looking out at the people who had come to witness this moment, donors, city officials, volunteers. But the faces that mattered most to him were the ones standing right beside him, Sophia and Emma. He reached for Sophia's hand, still marveling at the strength in her grip. Just months ago, she had been lying motionless in a hospital bed, her future uncertain. Now, she stood tall, radiant, her eyes filled with purpose. She had fought to reclaim her life, and today, this center, the dream she had started long before he ever knew about it, was finally real. Emma tugged at his sleeve, her excitement barely contained. "Can I say something too?" she whispered. Ryan smiled and lowered the microphone. "Go ahead, kiddo." Emma stepped forward, her small hands clutching the microphone as she looked out at the crowd. "I used to live on the streets," she said, her voice clear but soft. "I thought nobody wanted me. But then I met Mrs. Sophia, and she made me feel special. And then Mr. Ryan found me too. And now," she turned, looking up at them with a bright, hopeful smile. "Now I have a family." The crowd erupted in applause, but for Ryan, it was the sight of tears welling in Sophia's eyes that nearly undid him. She wrapped an arm around Emma, pulling her close, and Ryan felt his heart swell with gratitude. After the speeches, as guests explored the center's classrooms, library, and art spaces, Ryan found himself stepping away, taking a moment to watch from a distance. He saw Margaret, the orphanage director, sitting with a group of children, her wise eyes filled with pride. He saw volunteers handing out books, playing games, creating the kind of warmth and safety that every child deserved. And he saw Sophia and Emma, together, laughing. A year ago, his world had been one of deadlines and bottom lines, a constant chase for success. And yet, none of it had ever felt as fulfilling as this moment. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Victor Reynolds, the man who had tried to lure him to London with promises of power and prestige. "The offer still stands. Are you sure?" Ryan smiled, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and walked toward his family. Yes. He was sure. Because true success wasn't found in wealth or boardrooms. It was found here, in the arms of the woman he loved, in the laughter of the child who now called him Dad. It was found in home. Life often feels like an endless race, chasing status, wealth, and success. But at some point, we come to realize that the most important things in life cannot be bought. Ryan spent years building an empire, only to discover that happiness was never in the numbers, but in the simple moments shared with the ones he loved. This story reminds us that family and love are life's greatest treasures. We cannot turn back time to fix our past mistakes, but we can choose to make today meaningful, to be present, to cherish the people who matter. As we grow older, what remains is not the wealth we accumulated, but the memories we created, the warm embraces, the shared laughter, the stories told around the dinner table. So, let's appreciate every moment, express love while we still can, and remember that true happiness is not about what we own, but about who we have beside us.